Hey everybody, Plushie here. Once again, I apologize. This is one of those reviews that comes out like 2 hours before the event ends, which really sucks. I know, it's my bad, but at least I have a small excuse of them locking their third skill behind the completion of the event, which severely delayed my timeline for making a hot take video, and also because their timing is like smack dab in the middle of NA anniversary, so I ended up preferring making NA anniversary content. But finally, I'm here. I'm going to make not a super in-depth hot take like I usually do, but still I hope you guys enjoy today's review of Azumi no Isora. Azumi no Isora is an AoE quick alter ego, mainly used as a looper, but also has some utility in multi-core farming and challenge quests. She has an okay amount of attack stat, and she has really nice gains with a base gain of 0.55% per hit, and a 3-hit quick card and a 4-hit arts card. She has the double quick double buster deck, which is currently considered the best deck for quick servants because of Summer Scotty. Another very unique thing about them is that they have 3 separate attributes depending on what ascension they are in. They are Man in stage 1, Earth in stage 2, and Star in stage 3. So if you're not aware, there is an additional hidden triangle relationship on top of the class advantage triangle, where there is a 10% damage difference depending on if you're advantaged or disadvantaged. So for example, Sky is advantaged against Earth. So if you are a Sky attribute servant hitting an Earth attribute enemy, you are doing 1.1 times damage, and if vice versa, they will only be doing 0.9 times damage. Now, 10% damage difference doesn't sound like a lot. However, if you specifically consider, buffing a character with a lot of steroids, this is calculated after all of the other buff numbers resolve. So 10% extra damage can actually be pretty significant. So having this flexibility actually helps them maintain, at the very least, a 1.0 neutral times multiplier and not having to dip to 0.9, which can be an issue for certain units when they are farming. They also do have different alignments according to their ascension stage, but they are not as important. There are not a lot of specific synergies that are relevant. The only part that is relevant is they are lawful good in stage 1 and stage 2, and right now there is a bond boost CE that specifically gives lawful good units 20% bond up, so do remember to set them in ascension 1 and 2 if you are using that CE. Azumi no Isora's first skill is a 20% quick and buster duo buff for the entire party for 3 turns, as well as a 20% MP gain buff for 3 turns for the entire party as well, and a 2-time 3-turn evade on a 6-turn cooldown. So this is a really solid skill. It helps herself Luffy, of course, but also helps her other teammates that potentially fits with her in a multi-core setup. And the 2-time 3-turn evade is a very common survival effect seen on many quick servants, and of course, tying this kind of evade to an offensive buff is a lot better because you don't have to worry about wasting it even though you want to pop it on turn 1. So overall, just really solid skill, and the multi-core aspect will continue in her other skill sets. Her second skill is a self 30 MP battery, and then she charges the entire party by 20. So she would give herself a total of 50 charge, and her party members with 20 charge. And finally, the skill also gives her a 3000 max HP boost for 3 turns, and then this skill is on a 7-turn cooldown. So this is essentially Taikobo's battery, where it has allowed him to fit into a plethora of multi-core farming teams, so this will do the same for Azumi no Isora. And this skill has a 1-turn extra cooldown compared to Taikobo's battery. In exchange, it gets a bonus effect of a 3000 max HP boost. I definitely would have preferred it just to keep at 6-turn cooldown and lose the HP boost, but at the very least, this is not a heal, so very often you want to pop this immediately on turn 1, so the overheal would not be wasted, as opposed to this just being like a 3000 heal, for example. So really nice skill that gives her the multi-core potential. And finally, her third skill is a party-wide 20% MP damage up for 3 turns, as well as setting Waterside Battlefield for 3 turns. And she also gets 2 on-attack bonus effects for 3 times 3 turns. So whenever she attacks with her quick card, she casts 10% defense down for 3 turns on the target. The defense down happens before the quick card does damage. And for Buster cards, whenever she attacks, she gives herself a 10% crit up, and also of course the crit up happens before the Buster card actually does damage. So this is a really solid skill, mostly because of the party-wide 20% MP damage up that reinforces her multi-core DPS role, and her ability to set Water Field, which of course benefits other Water Field abusers, but mostly for herself because, as you'll see later, her passives and her MP both benefits pretty nicely from being on Water Field. These on-attack effects I don't really see as very desirable. They really like making those for duo servants, such as Dioscuri and Trung sisters, and this is just another iteration of it. I don't think they're particularly impressive. They're basically 30% defense down and 30% crit up for 3 turns with a lot of extra steps, but still, you know, if you consider these two are effects tagged onto the MP damage up and the Water's Field effect, this is a really solid skill. Azumi no Isora has a couple of passives. She has 10% buff removal resist as well as debuff resist. I wouldn't bet on the buff removal resist personally. She has passive 8% crit up as well as passive party-wide 5% crit up. So it's a nice little bonus for herself at a 13% total crit buff, but it's not that large. She also has passive 300 damage cut on her special version of Divinity, which is pretty nice, especially on a quick servant who doesn't always have access to hard defense like arts. And then finally, whenever they are in Waterside, she gains 5 crit stars per turn as well as 5 MP per turn, and this actually is a pretty big contributing factor to how good she is at looping. And finally, Azumi no Isora's MP is an AoE 8-hit quick MP that increases her own MP generation rate by 20% before it actually does damage on Waterside for a single turn, which once again she can set herself. So this is a really consistent effect that further boosts her refund numbers to a pretty ridiculous amount for a quick servant. She also removes all enemies' defensive buffs before damage, which is also a super solid effect for challenge quests. We've seen this on other strong servants such as Summer Ibuki, and even though a lot of like really important defensive buffs that is tied to the main gimmick of the boss are unremovable, having this kind of effect is still really powerful for not just removing invul or solemn defense, but also removing stuff like damage cut and defense ups that are less commonly boxed buffs that are unremovable. And then the MP also deals 150% extra damage to enemies with chaotic alignment. This is a very wide coveraging anti-trait as seen on some other characters such as Karen and Arcoade, and this is obviously very strong for both farming and challenge quests. And finally, their overcharge is a 10% quick up and buster up before damage for a single turn before the MP does damage, which honestly is pretty lame. I definitely would have preferred the anti-chaotic be skilled with overcharge, but overall this is still a really strong MP. So how do I feel about Azumi no Isora? Well, in terms of farming, she is basically superb in both single core and multi-core. In terms of single core, she's one of the best quick loopers in the game, even better in refund than some of the more modern top tier units such as Britomart and Riku. Her refund level is on par with some of the greatest of all time such as Charlemagne, Sumero Kitan, and Daikokten. Mainly due to, on top of her really high hit count MP, she also gets 20% extra MP gain boost on her MP on Waterside, as well as a 5% passive MP charge on her passive. And of course, she can set her own Waterside, so she's guaranteed to have those in single core looping. She can loop against 3/3/3 riders without plug suit while using a black grill with double Summer Scotty, which is honestly very rare amongst quick loopers to not have to use plug suit or a starting charge CE. And on the looping damage side of things, Azumi no Isora also is pretty competent. First and foremost, without considering any specific anti-traits, she does out-damage Riku by a little bit, and I think it's quite important for alter egos and pretenders to at least match the damage of berserkers of their same card type in order to stay competitive, because they obviously have, half the coverage as a berserker does, but they all do only 1.5 times anti-class damage instead of 2.0 times. So at the very least, Azumi no Isora is not going to lose against Riku when hitting cavalries. And also, Azumi no Isora has quite a bit of extra tools that can help them, have a higher looping damage in practice. First and foremost is, of course, their wide coveraging anti-chaotic anti-trait. Another slight advantage that Azumi no Isora has that most servants don't is their ability to choose their own attributes according to their ascension stage. As I mentioned earlier, when you're considering a bunch of buffs stacked onto a singular DPS, that 10% damage difference generated from the attribute triangle actually comes into play a lot more significantly than you might initially think. So having the ability to almost always do 1.1 times extra damage against a given boss, or at the very least do 1.0, because Star at the very least is going to be doing neutral attribute damage, is a lot better than most servants that have to deal with the fact that technically 1/3 of the time they're only going to be doing 0.9 times damage to the main boss of a farming node. In terms of multi-core farming performance, if you're familiar with how Taikobo works, Azumi no Isora functions quite similarly. They have very similar party-wide steroid numbers, Taikobo having 15% attack up, MP damage up, and quick up, while Azumi no Isora having 20% quick up, buster up, and MP damage up. This does give Azumi no Isora more flexibility in team build because they can also be paired with buster units. And they of course also have the identical battery numbers, charging themselves with 50 while their party members by 20. Now there are two types of Taikobo multi-core comps. The first kind includes him as a one-off and just requires him to clear a weaker wave while he supports a stronger DPS, a lot of the times actually a single target instead of another AoE. Azumi no Isora can fit that role very well, sometimes even better because Azumi no Isora also gives the entire party MP gain up, which sometimes can come into play for boosting the MP gain for that single target unit. But the other type of Taikobo multi-core comps usually does include double Taikobo, and it heavily relies on their really strong anti-divine damage. Taikobo not just has an anti-divine anti-trait on his MP, but also another massive anti-divine power mod on his skill too. So you don't really have to have a lot of external buffs for Taikobo to do massive amounts of damage against a divine target. But Azumi no Isora does not have such a strong steroid against chaotic enemies. Yes, she does have anti-chaotic on her MP, but she doesn't have an additional huge power mod to deal further damage to them, so she might struggle if you try to do double Azumi no Isora in a higher HP gated node. I'd still say Azumi no Isora is extremely solid in multi-core, it's just that double Azumi no Isora might not be as strong as double Taikobo, specifically against Divine versus, them against Chaotic. I guess another small thing to mention in terms of their multi-core performance is of course their great synergy with Summer Scotty. As a multi-core DPS, they already support other quick units pretty well, but they have the added benefit of setting Waterside Field, which of course Summer Scotty does give herself additional MP damage up when they are on the Waterside Field. So Summer Scotty can actually dish out a decent amount of damage with their MP while being supported by Azumi no Isora. And of course, in this case, you wouldn't have to sacrifice one of your meta supports in place of a weaker multi-core DPS like hybrid support in order to have them do good damage. You can just use your meta support as a wave clear as well if need be. So even though I'm not saying this is like super viable all the time, it is a nice bonus specifically for Azumi no Isora that Taikobo doesn't necessarily have. In terms of challenge quest performance, there's not much more to say about Azumi no Isora as a main DPS, because what makes them solid in loop farming also makes them just very solid in challenge quests as well. Of course, including that very wide coveraging anti-chaotic and their MP, and also their very good natural refund. Of course, they also have that skill 3 for that little bit of extra card damage steroid, and they also have the perfect deck for doing card damage as a quick unit with QQBBA that synergizes perfectly with Summer Scotty. Of course, they also have the added utility of removing all defensive buffs before damage on their MP. We've seen that being useful on other loopers, and of course, they are no exception. This allows them to bypass quite a bit of annoying boss gimmicks, so that is a super strong effect to have on a spammable MP. But of course, Azumi no Isora also has the ability to support her teammates. Now, I will say their supporting generally are not very good, but they are, in my opinion, the best water field setters in the game. There's currently only 4 water field setters in the game. We have Lancer Melt, who is super selfish. We have Zhang Jue, whose field applying abilities is not even guaranteed. And we have Talalak, who is better than the previous two, but not that much better. Her kit is a bit lackluster, even though it does contain some form of party-wide support. A lot of it is actually defensive, so I don't like it that much. So Azumi no Isora technically is the best Waterfield setter. I will say though, it's still questionable to try to pick her over a meta support for some other card type units such as Nemo, who does really want Waterside Field but doesn't necessarily want to sacrifice a third meta art support for Azumi no Isora, and units such as Andromeda and Lancer Yu, who does synergize better naturally with Azumi no Isora, have minimal bonuses from being in the water field, so they don't necessarily really want them over a generic quick support either. I will say though, just like I mentioned in the multi-core farming section, Summer Scotty does benefit very well from Azumi no Isora. Summer Scotty's MP also has the added utility for challenge quest because it drains all enemies gauge by 1, which is quite important for a quick team that sometimes does lack hard survival. Speaking of hard survival, Azumi no Isora's party-wide utility also helps Caster Scotty when paired with them because they have a party-wide battery to charge Caster Scotty's MP by a little bit, and also gives the entire party MP gain boost. This MP gain boost, because it is not specified, includes both offensive and defensive MPs, so not just when you're picking Caster Scotty's face cards, whenever she's taking hits as well, she will gain extra bits of MP, which is very useful considering how powerful Caster Scotty's MP actually is if you're able to pull it off. The only problem with Azumi no Isora, especially with double Summer Scotty, in my opinion, is of course their long cooldown. So you will have quite a bit of dead time if you don't finish off the enemy in a swift manner. In conclusion, Azumi no Isora is actually contender for one of the strongest AoE quick units. They are great in basically all fronts, single core, multi-core, challenge quests, they can handle it all. They can also serve both as a main DPS as well as a pretty competent semi-support. They are just positioned in a very unfortunate timing because it's right before anniversary, and also because they are quick, the community isn't really that welcome to quick units in general, making them quite underrated in my opinion, and I really hope in the future there are more opportunities to see them shine. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video. This is definitely not as detailed as my usual hot take videos, but I still hope this is mildly interesting, and I'll see you guys in the next one.